The man who waited outside my apartment, the police told me the man outside my apartment had been dead for 6 years. That wasn't the part that frightened me. The frightening part was that every night, he stood a little closer to my door. I moved into the apartment in October. It was cheap, recently renovated, and only 15 minutes from my office. The building was old, but not in a charming way. The hallway smelled like wet concrete, the elevator groaned between floors, and half the ceiling lights never worked. Still, I lived alone and didn't need much. For the first 2 weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then I started hearing footsteps outside my door. They always began at exactly 2:14 in the morning. Slow steps coming from the stairwell. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. The first night, I assumed it was a neighbor coming home late. The second night, I checked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. On the third night, the footsteps stopped directly outside my apartment. I waited for a knock. None came. I looked through the peephole again and saw a man standing near the elevator. He was facing away from me. He wore a dark jacket and grey pants. His arms hung loosely at his sides. He wasn't waiting for the elevator because the button wasn't lit. He just stood there. I watched him for almost a minute. Then, without moving the rest of his body, he slowly turned his head toward my apartment. I jumped away from the door. When I looked again, he was gone. The next morning, I asked the woman living across the hall if she had seen anyone suspicious. She stared at me for a few seconds before answering. What did he look like? The question made me uncomfortable. I described the jacket and grey pants. Her face changed. She told me I should speak to the building manager. The manager was an elderly man named Mr. Vance. When I explained what I had seen, he immediately dismissed it. Old building, he said. People hear things. I asked why my neighbor had reacted so strangely. He stopped smiling. Then he told me that a tenant had died on my floor several years earlier. His name was Daniel Mercer. He had lived in apartment 604. My apartment. According to Mr. Vance, Daniel had disappeared for 3 days before anyone noticed. His body was eventually found in the elevator shaft. The police believed he had opened the elevator doors while the car was on another floor and fallen inside. But there was one detail Mr. Vance seemed reluctant to mention. Daniel's apartment door had been locked from the inside. That night, I stayed awake until 2:14. The footsteps returned. 1, 2, 3. Silence. I checked the peephole. The man was standing in the middle of the hallway, closer than before. This time, he was facing my door. His head was tilted slightly downward, so I couldn't see his eyes. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the peephole. The image was blurry, but the man was clearly visible. Then my phone vibrated. A notification appeared from an unknown number. Stop recording me. My blood went cold. I stepped back and called the police. While I waited for them, I heard something scrape against the other side of the door. Not a knock, more like a fingernail slowly dragging across the wood. The police arrived 10 minutes later. The hallway was empty. They searched the stairwell and checked every floor, but found no one. I showed them the video. The officer watched it twice. Then he asked me where the man was supposed to be. I pointed at the screen. The hallway in the recording was empty. I could see the elevator, the carpet, the flickering ceiling light, but not the man. The next day, I installed a security camera above my door. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, the camera sent me a motion alert at 2:14. I opened the live feed. The man was standing at the far end of the hallway. At 2:16, he moved closer. At 2:18, he was halfway to my apartment. He never walked. Every time the camera refreshed, he simply appeared in a new position. At 2:20, he stood directly beneath the camera. I could finally see his face. His skin was pale and swollen. A deep wound ran across his forehead. His eyes were open, but they were looking in different directions. Then he lifted one finger to his lips. The camera went offline. Seconds later, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft knocks. I didn't move. A voice spoke from the hallway. It sounded exactly like mine. Open the door. I held my breath. The voice repeated itself. Open the door. I forgot my keys. Then the doorknob slowly turned. I had locked it, but the handle continued moving back and forth. Finally, the voice whispered, "You're sleeping in my room." I stayed inside the bathroom until sunrise. At 8 in the morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell the manager. I didn't collect the rest of my belongings. I drove to my brother's house and stayed there for a week. Eventually, I contacted a moving company and paid them to clear out the apartment. They called me after arriving. The front door was already open. Nothing had been stolen, but there was something written on the bedroom wall. A message scratched into the fresh paint. He let me out. The police searched the apartment again. They found no signs of forced entry. They also checked the building's old records. That was when they discovered something the manager had never told me. Daniel Mercer hadn't died by accident. Security footage showed him standing in the hallway outside apartment 604 on the night of his death. He stood there for 4 hours, staring at his own front door. At 2:14 in the morning, the apartment door opened. The footage showed Daniel stepping backward as someone came out. Someone who looked exactly like him. The second Daniel walked toward the elevator. The real Daniel followed. Neither of them was seen again. 6 years later, I moved into his apartment. I live in another city now. I changed my number and bought a house with no shared hallways or elevators. 4 months, nothing happened. Then, last night, my security camera sent me a motion alert. The time was 2:14 a.m. A man was standing at the edge of my driveway. He wore a dark jacket and grey pants. Behind him stood someone else, someone with my face. And according to the camera's motion history, they have been moving closer to the house all night.